look at them as a linear system. They're used in like compression algorithms for JPEG pictures and satellite compression. So they found a lot of use for these things. But basically, the idea is that nature really is not built around lines. Lines exist in our minds. When you look on the beach, you don't see lots of lines. You see a coastline from a distance. But if you get very close, you see lots of increasingly grains of sand, right? So it's very disorderly. Well, here's the take-home message from all this. Fractal systems, like the way nature is designed, have chaotic dynamics, right?
Correct.
Not linear dynamics. And they're based more on chaos than linear, which means that little changes can have big effects, right?
Correct.
It's not just that big changes have big effects and little changes have little effects. Little things in the right circumstances can have big effects. And that means things are a lot less predictable than we thought. I think we found this out very convincingly with the recent financial kind of situations we had in the markets and Wall Street and so forth, with the types of products that they were investing in, is that they were a lot less predictable than anybody thought. They were using the wrong models.
Yes, indeed.
And yes, little changes can percolate throughout the system, and all of a sudden the whole thing is going into freefall and needs a government bailout. That's a kind of perfect example of chaos theory. We've been living under this illusion for a long time that things are orderly and predictable, linear, and chaos theory says real-world systems don't exist like that. And just one last thing that's important about it, the more tightly coupled systems become with our technology, the more chaotic they become too. And things can happen in ways that you never expect. So we're actually inviting more and more chaos in the more we couple systems tightly together. It could be financial systems, it could be the way our cars are designed, whatever. You're going to get increasingly unpredictable effects.
The interesting thing about chaos, though, Dr. Hines, is that chaos can be prepared for, meaning you can engender and support what D. Hawk called chaotic systems, meaning you prepare systems and structures that anticipate and are built for chaos, because chaos is really the norm. We just haven't accepted it. And through that, you can have order. But when you force an order and you force structure that does not allow for chaos, you actually get chaos. He built Visa based on chaos theory. Anyway, he has a whole book about it and how he built Visa. And it was very interesting. You speak in the book about the butterfly effect, how you can have a little bitty change, but it affects something across the world. Can you explain how you know about the butterfly effect?
Well, right. You're raising a lot of good points there.
Thank you.
Yeah. The butterfly effect is the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings over the Amazon rainforest could affect the weather over in Africa or Europe, because a slight change can lead to all sorts of effects. And that's been found, by the way, it's really been found to be true in weather systems and prediction. They find just a tiny little fluctuation over the smallest area can percolate throughout the whole system. And so basically, but what you're saying is a very important point, is that when we build systems for predictability, we inevitably create something in the long run that's going to go chaotic and become unpredictable. And if we build them for resiliency and let there be a certain amount of change to naturally occur in the system, it'll be more stable in the long run. So
and more creative, too.
More creative and more evolutionary. So it's a real question of where you want your stability. Do you want it from second to second? If that's important to you, then you're going to have long-term disorder. Or are you more concerned with long-term stability, which in that case, you need to allow more short-term disorder, right?
Yes.
And I mean, a good example of that is what happened to the former Soviet Union. You know, I mean, they didn't allow any change at all in their system, right? And at the end of it, we had Gorbachev trying to introduce reforms desperately so that the system could evolve and grow, but it was too late. The system had already become too rigid and sclerotic, and it just fell apart. The whole Eastern European system, with the Soviet Union kind of being at the lead of that, just completely fell apart. So that's a kind of an example of a brittle structure, right? Because it can't evolve. So systems that seem to survive into the longer term allow a lot more chaos in the short term. You're talking about the Visa. Another good example is the way the whole internet's designed, right? If one node goes down, it's designed, you know, it's really actually designed by the military originally, and they kind of understand these things, ironically, much better than a lot of the academic communities. It's kind of surprising, but if you build these systems that are very resilient, You need to have a lot of flexibility in there, but you lose a lot of control, which is a real benefit to us now, right? Because the internet cannot easily be controlled anymore at all. And that's why things are going to evolve in a good way, because there's more chaos. More chaos.
You write in the book about a few other things I really want to go through deeply with you. One is the power of the subconscious mind. Now, many of us have heard this, but this is the basis by which remote viewing, correct me if I'm incorrect, remote sensing is accessing the material of the universe or whatever is available in non-locality. The subconscious mind, you say, is the hidden intelligence working through the human being, is through the subconscious mind. So what is the subconscious mind other than what we're calling it? What is it that you're referring to?
Well, it's a whole system of processes that thinks, but because of what we were talking about earlier in the show, your awareness has decided that you don't need to be listening in on it all the time. And so you get indications that it's there from time to time from gut feelings and intuitions and so forth, but you're actually not tracking it. It's something that's happening below the surface. Now, just to give an example of what the subconscious is, a digestion is something that's happening subconsciously. Very important process. We can't live for a couple days without it. But
now, isn't it autonomically happening?
It is and it isn't. I mean, it is happening autonomically, but it's certainly affected by your moods, right? Have you ever really gotten into a situation where your moods affected your digestion? So it is affected by your thoughts and your feelings and so forth, and that is related to our subconscious. Another example, even easier to understand, breathing. Now, you can consciously control your breath, right?
Correct.
But if you forget about it, who takes over? Your subconscious mind. So it's a whole area of processes where, you know, what remote viewers call it, you might have heard this before from your other interviewees, the limin, where the word subliminal comes from. There's this threshold of awareness, and below that threshold, you're not consciously aware of what's going on. And just to give you an example of that, there's plenty around you that's below the limit of your consciousness, even in your body. If you just stop and pay attention to, like, your left big toe, right? You can check in on how it's doing, but before we started talking about that, you weren't paying attention to it, probably, right?
Correct.
So that's an example. There are all these processes where your mind can focus like a spotlight onto different aspects of your awareness, but usually they're on autopilot. So there's several different types of subconscious processes. I mean, body regulation is one type of subconscious process. And there's also feelings and intuitions and learned types of subconscious beliefs that we have in us that we're not aware of. There are a lot of studies that have been done about this. I always like to mention that book by Guy Claxton, Hair, Brain, Tortoise Mind, How Intelligence Increases When You Think Less. Basically, the point of this is
that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Say it again. Intelligence.
Yeah, this is a must-read book. I have no commercial interest in it at all.
Go ahead. Say the name of the book and then
Hair. It's by a physiologist in Britain. It's a cognitive physiologist. I think that's what you would call him, or a cognitive psychologist. Guy Claxton, Hair, Brain, Tortoise Mind, How Intelligence Increases When You Think Less. And it basically shows study after study that show you often do a better job at what you're doing when you don't think about it so much. How about that? Because you're interfering with your subconscious thinking processes. And a lot of studies show that you actually know a lot more than you think you know. But once you start thinking about it consciously, you start interfering. Some of these processes work much better. Remote viewing, obviously, is a good example, but just everyday life. When you rely on your feelings about things under certain circumstances, and then when you go with your logical thinking. I'm not trying to put down logical thinking. It's a very powerful tool. But there's a lot, you know what a good example of this is? They found that in police lineups, that if they asked you to identify somebody you saw at a crime scene or something, you do a better job at it if you don't start talking about it.
That's interesting.
But if they asked you what did the person look like, the suspected perpetrator or something like this,
yes,
you do a worse job in a lineup, police lineup, than if you don't talk about it. And what that shows is that your subconscious processes of recognizing things that you don't